Touch the leg and hello everyone. Welcome to the virtual panel to review the situation in Tibet on the basis of some selected reports and publications on Tibet that came out this year. This virtual panel is being organized by the Tibet Bureau here in Geneva. I'm Kalden Somo from the Bureau, and I will be moderating today's virtual panel. So tomorrow, on the 10th of December, the United Nations and its agencies are celebrating the 73rd year since the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights under the central theme, reducing inequalities, advancing human rights. However, human rights and fundamental freedom that are enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights are systematically violated by China in Tibet and other regions under its control. For Tibetans, International Human Rights Day is a harsh reminder of painful stories of suppression and subjugation by China. And also, the day, International Human Rights Day, is day to remember Tibetans inside Tibet who continue to stand up for their freedom and their rights. Therefore, this virtual panel, which is taking place on the eve of the International Human Rights Day, is dedicated to our Tibetan brothers and sisters who are silenced and suppressed by China. So, in this panel now, we will be looking into the situation in Tibet as documented by the Central Tibetan Administration in its latest publication titled Tibet, 70 Years of Occupation and Oppression. And secondly, then we will look into the Human Rights Watch detailed analysis on China's crackdown on monks of Dinko Monastery in Dingri Tibetan area. And then we will be talking about Tibetan Centers for Human Rights and Democracy's ongoing project, decoding CCP's political jargon, slogans, and faces. So to give us insights on these reports and publication, we are pleased to have with us today the Central Tibetan Administration's official spokesperson, Tenzin Lekshela, joining us from Dharamshala, India. And we have Sophie Richardson, China Director for Human Rights Watch, joining us from New York. And Tibetan Center for Human Rights and Democracy's Decoder team, Tsering Dojila, a senior Tibetan researcher, joining us from Australia, and Ilas Guprutin, advocacy and communication consultant for the center, joining us from California. So once again, a very warm welcome to all our panelists and the virtual audience. So before we proceed with the panel, a couple of housekeeping notes to make. Each panelist will have initial 10 minutes to give your initial opening remark, followed by question and answer session, and then we will conclude this panel with final remark from the panelists, 2 to 3 minutes each. For our virtual audience, we will be taking live questions from you for our panelists. So please feel free to put your questions in the comment section down below. And I sincerely request our audience kindly indicate the name of panelists to whom you are asking your questions. So let's begin to hear from our panelists. So let's start with the Central Tibetan Administration's publication titled Tibet 70 Years of Occupation and Oppression. So for these, may I invite Central Tibetan Administration's official spokesperson, Tenzin Lekshela. Lekshela, could you kindly briefly explain us what brings Central Tibetan Administration to come out with this publication, Tibet, 70 Years of Occupation and Oppression? And also, maybe can you also give us an overview on how and why China is imposing its rule on the Tibetan people according to the study conducted by the Central Tibetan Administration? Over to you, Lexila.
Thank you, Kandila, and I'm pleased and happy to be among the distinguished panels over here. And since this is the eve of the World Human Rights Day, as Kandila said, it's a matter of pride, it's a matter of happy and joy, but it is also a matter of sadness for all the Tibetans who are still languishing under the grapes of Chinese Iron Curtain. So my topic here is the 70 years of Chinese occupations and operations. The CDA has recently published a response to the Chinese white paper, which the China has published 2 days before the so-called this peaceful liberation of Tibet, right, 23rd May 1951. So they every 10 years they try to celebrate. They try to make sure that we'll see the celebrations, we'll see the joys of what China has been doing so far in Tibet with regarding their occupations in the name of liberations. This year, since they have published the white papers on the prosperities, on the liberations, on the developments, so the Central Tibet Administration thought that it is valid for us to respond, right, point to point, on the matters which they have discussed, which the matter has put. So initially, what we thought is there is an issue on Tibet on the historical perspectives. CTA, obviously, we long for resolving the Tibetan issues right through middle way policy, but there is a reservations. There is a uncompromising stand on the resolutions. That is the history. So what we believe is that history is a past, and we shouldn't indulge on these histories as a politicians or as a leaders or as a negotiators. Rather, leave it to the historians. Rather, we need to talk more about the future in fulfilling the aspirations of the Tibetan people. But so far, over the last 70 years, China has been taking the histories in the wrong sense by manipulating, by distorting the histories. So therefore, even in this recent white paper, which they have published, they try to narrate their own kind of stories, which is distorted. So the first chapter, what we try to impress upon is to show to the world that what is the factual historical issues, right? We talk about our relations with Mongols. We talk about our own kingdoms, right? The Tibetan empires, and then about the Qing, Ming, or what relations we have. Even we had relations with British and India. So we try to account all the relationship which we had in the past, which proves that we were independent country, right? And second thing is, since they are more jubilant in trying to impress the world that Tibet was indeed a liberated state. So, but there is another story, right? Because if it is liberated, the question is why they have to send 40,000 armies to make it a peaceful liberation. So this is a big kind of a problem with China. But if it's a peaceful liberation, it should be resolved peacefully, not occupations, not through bloodsheds. But somehow China, since from 1950s, early soon after PRC came into existence, their main purpose is to occupy Tibet, and the process has been there since going for 10 years. And in 1951, we were forced to sign the 7-point agreements, which they believe they try to convey the message to the world that this is a peaceful liberation, but it was not. It was a blatant lie from China, right? And the world should know that. And second thing is that the process in which they occupied Tibet was not as per what they have deemed so far. It was not. It was the occupation in the name of liberation, right? So since it was occupied for the last 70 years, what had it done? Now, the question is, well, do they really help the Tibetans if they liberated Tibet? If they, the so-called, if they said that if they have liberated Tibet, right, do they really help the Tibetans for the last 70 years? There's a big question mark, right? If you look at every aspect of Tibetans, since then, they try to engage in all sorts of means to occupy Tibet, to make Tibet as China, not as Tibet, but as Chinese cities, Chinese town, Chinese village, right? Not even they even try even a small piece of right land, they try to rename into Chinese, right? So therefore, what we felt is whatever they have done, the question is what is the reason now, right? So the whole thing, I would say, is the matter of stability for the Chinese. The China want to be stable. If China want to be stable, they want to be a stability, to impose stability, right? Through hardships, through operations. So for that one, they have done since 1959. There were lots of people killed, right? Thousands and thousands were dead, right? Massacres happened, right? The cultural institutions were destroyed, right? So there were a dire state of right, a kind of a genocide happened in Tibet. But somehow China wants to be the world power, and China wants to show to the world that everything what they have done inside Tibet is happy. And Xinhua was very impressive in showing all the details of tourists. Right, just recently they show about 36 million, more than 36 million tourists visit Tibet in 1/3 quarter. That was not only the Tibet, that was only they are talking about Tibet Autonomous Region. So there is a big confusion in China, which is a state designed mechanism which they built. They want to make sure that Tibet is only the Tibet Autonomous Region, not the whole of Tibet. Right. When you Google Tibet, they will only show the photo of Tibet Autonomous Region. So that was the state mechanism which they have been putting in the mind of the people. Right. So therefore, we want to impress upon the China that Tibet was not only the so-called Tibet Autonomous Region. Tibet is right encompasses all the 3 traditional provinces of Tibet. So in this paper, in this response, right, initially what we thought about is like we look at the engineering design which they have been putting forward to inside Tibet to annihilate the Tibetan cultures, right, and then try to make it into a Chinatown, right, in respect to the social issues, like if you look at identity, if you look at culture, tradition, language, way of livings, like religion, right, they have a strict impose of right rules and regulations. The state has designed a mechanism which they try to restrict the Tibetans in following their own traditions by imposing foreign traditions, right? So therefore, it's a well sophisticated design from China to establish in maintaining Tibet as a Chinese state, but was not. That's the problem. And another thing is the political issues, right? We have political repressions. We have gross human rights violations in Tibet, religious violations, freedom violations. We have violations of the rights of expressions, rights of movements. There are lots of things which even China has agreed upon in the United Nations, right? But somehow they violate their own issues which they have impressed upon, which they agreed upon. But somehow, even in Olympic, 2008 Olympic, they agreed upon lots of things, but they haven't done. There's still gross human rights violations taking place in China. So everything is worried. Everybody's worried about the people, not just Tibet, not just Uyghurs, not just Southern Mongolians, not just Hong Kong, but the Chinese people themselves, right? And China, they are good in putting up all the white papers, but white paper is just white paper, right? But they doesn't have any substance in it. So therefore, in all, because like I have a very limited time, but somehow what I want to talk about is that the CTA, right, felt that there is a need of urgency for the world to understand that whatever happens in Tibet was completely wrong, was not according to the aspirations of the Tibetan people. It goes against the will of the people. And they try to wipe away the Tibetan culture and identity. So there is a way out. So we hope that CTA in the last page that we worked on the way forward. We told the Chinese leaders to understand the gravity of the issues, right, and resolve the long-standing conflict which we had in order to fulfill the aspirations of the Tibetan people. So this is the way forward for China, for the betterment of China and for the betterment of the Tibetan people. Thank you. I think I took 10 minutes.
Yes. Yeah. So you're on time, Lexila, and we will come back to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, at the later stage. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
Lexila, so thank you so much for giving us a broad overview on historical perspective and also China's occupation of Tibet in the name of liberation. And also you just have very powerfully explained us what is exactly happening in Tibet now, right? And also how China is promoting its narrative and the need of the world to understand the ground situation in Tibet with the way forward in this official Central Tibetan Administration's official response to the China's white paper. So thank you so much for walking us through this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, so Lexila has given us a very broad overview on the situation in Tibet since China's occupation of Tibet, right? And how China is sinicizing the land, people, and mind of Tibet. Now, let's look into a very specific case of human rights violations by China in Tibet from our second speaker, Sophie Richardson, China Director for Human Rights Watch. So, Sophie, you are known for your analytical skills in bringing human rights at the forefront, right? In the human rights world, right? So in the mid of this year, the Human Rights Watch has released a very detailed and descriptive report on China's crackdown on Dingo Monastery and restrictions on communications in Tibet. And suddenly, China's crackdown on Dingo Monastery, involving harsh and long prison sentence, is not the first case, right? I'm sure you will agree me on this. But let me. Okay. So this is certainly not the first case. However, China's persecution of this 46-year-old monk Chogyal Wangpo, the leader of the monastery, and other monks of the monasteries and the villages, this reflected multiple layers of issues, right, in this very particular case. So could you briefly explain the account surrounding to this situation, surrounding to this case, the detention and imprisonment of Chogyal Wangpo, the monk, the head of the monastery, Dingo Monastery, and also Human Rights Watch has described this case as reflecting increasing pressures on Chinese bureaucrats, including applying principle of preemptive security in all aspects of their work. So could you help us to understand this? What does it mean? And maybe also walk us through the situation surrounding this particular case.
Sana, it's such a pleasure and an honor to be with you and my fellow panelists today. It's a group from whom I always learn. I also want very much to thank, in a very broad sense, all of the people across the Tibetan community who have had the confidence in us to share their stories. Because one of the issues I think we're fundamentally talking about today is that act alone of sharing a story outside of Tibetan areas can be incredibly dangerous and risky. I'm still astonished that my colleagues were able to pull together and fit together all of the pieces of this puzzle. In a way, it's a simple story that in September of 2019, Chegyal Whampoa from the Tingri community was in Lhasa, and he accidentally left his phone in a cafe. And the cafe owner picked it up and looked at it and gave it to the police. And I think we can all imagine what happened next. But that the police then raided the monastery and a number of homes in the community. And at the core of their concern was the fact that people in this monastery had given, and in the community had sent money to their communities in Nepal who had been affected by the earthquake. And the way Chinese police came to know about this correspondence or these communications and the transfer of money was by reading WeChat discussions. And the sentences that came forward for each of these four monks. Sorry, I have new glasses and I can't see anything, but I want to make sure, that we talk about these people by name. So Chegyal Whampoa was given a sentence of 20 years. 20 years. Lobsang Jinpa got 19 years. Norbu Dondrup, 17. And Nawang Yeshi, 5 years, respectively, even though none of what any of them did was actually in violation of a Chinese law. It's not illegal to send money. It's not illegal to communicate with people outside the country. It's not illegal to make a humanitarian donation. And part of the reason we had been particularly interested in this case was that in October of 2020, shortly after the Tengra monks had been sentenced, we had reported on the detention of 2 other young Tibetans for having sent remittances to communities in India. And one of those 2 people died as a result of injuries inflicted in detention. And this is to us an especially worrying trend of the last several years, not just in Tibetan areas, but in different parts of the region, that increasingly to be sent to prison is to potentially to face a death sentence due to ill treatment or a lack of access to adequate medical care. But this project, I think, drew together a number of themes that we had written about over the years, both specifically in Tibetan areas and elsewhere. That authorities still view monastics, monks and nuns, with particular suspicion, that religion is still treated as a fundamentally threatening alternative vehicle for political organizing, that even the most peaceful free speech can and will be prosecuted if the authorities don't like it, that authorities increasingly rely on high-tech tools like surveillance of platforms like WeChat, to arbitrarily monitor people's communications. The increasing criminalization simply of having contact with people, not just outside the region, but even in other regions of China, has come under increasing scrutiny in our view, and about detention conditions. We've written about at least a half dozen cases in the last year of people dying either in detention or soon after they've been released. None of this, I think, bodes well. And, I think I also wanted to stress, Kaldenla, if you'll indulge me for just a moment, that especially to pick up on some of the points that Leshela just made, that these are some of the kinds of abuses that we have documented in the case of the Tengdao monks are sort of classic civil and political rights violations. They're about free speech, they're about the right to a fair trial. But not only, I think, are we equally concerned about issues around economic and social and cultural rights, like forced resettlement, like the ways that the political economy of the region has been radically reshaped in ways that disempower Tibetans, that discriminate against them, and that contribute to inequality, often under the guise of the poverty alleviation campaign or other nice sounding terms. I think we also really have to be concerned about the ways the Chinese government is essentially hollowing out or erasing a distinct Tibetan identity. We wrote last year about restrictions on not just teaching in Tibetan, but children's ability to access a full education in Tibetan, that increasingly Tibetan children are only taught in Chinese. I would also strongly encourage people to read the report that was released on, this is Thursday, right? On Tuesday night by the Tibet Action Institute about residential boarding schools for Tibetan children, as many as 800,000 children between the ages of 6 and 18, where it's not only an all Chinese speaking environment, but there are enormous social and emotional harms done to children who are taken away from their families and placed in these kinds of institutions. So in a way, the treatment of the Tengdao monks, or their fate, was sort of, in a way, kind of a snapshot of a whole set of problems. But I wouldn't want us to lose sight, as I know you would never, I'm not suggesting you're being negligent in any way, but there are so many different interconnected problems here. I think if there's room for optimism, it's that between diplomatic boycotts of the Olympics, between the Uyghur Tribunal's judgment about crimes against humanity and other human rights crimes in Xinjiang, there's more attention to these kinds of concerns. I think we as advocates face the challenge of turning that concern into meaningful relief for and support for Tibetans, their religious freedom, their distinct identity, their rights to learn the language they want, and their rights to talk to their relatives, their community members all over the world. That's the hard work that we'll be devoting considerable energy to in the coming year. So I hope that's helpful. I'm happy to answer any questions about either that particular report or any of our other work, but I'm also extremely interested to hear what the other panelists have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. Thank you very much for bringing us in-depth insights on the situation of monks of Tengku monasteries, and also with this particular case in focus. And you have brought so many issues, list of violations that are happening in Tibet, and also in related to this year Human Rights Day theme, reducing inequality with different repressive policies and with different policies like forcing nomads, and also you have talked about us about the social and emotional issues, social and economic, and all this. So thank you so much for bringing this disturbing situation and issues in the panel. So may I invite our third speaker, Ila Skubrutin, Advocacy and Communication Consultant for Tibetan Center for Human Rights and Democracy, based in Dharamshala, India, and Ila is joining us from California. Ila is trained in social science and human rights from University of California and London School of Economics. She has worked with different human rights and humanitarian projects, including Save the Children. So Ila, you are very actively involved in this Decoding CCP project. could you briefly tell us about Tibetan Center for Human Rights and Democracy's ongoing project, Decoding CCP, and what is it all about? And how this Decoding CCP project by Tibetan Center for Human Rights and Democracy is different or is unique from other similar decoder projects. And maybe, if time permits, could you also just briefly explain us, because this year's central theme for this International Human Rights Day is advancing human rights. So maybe could you also talk us about how this Decoding CCP project by the Tibetan Center for Human Rights will contribute in advancing or in advocating human rights across the world?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. It is truly an honor to be on this panel with you all. So I'll just get right into describing what this tool is. It's a website, an open source online guide to understanding hundreds of Chinese propaganda words and phrases. These slogans often seem incomprehensible, but they are critical to understanding and challenging China's growing discourse power. China seems to be everywhere, no matter where you look. It's no longer just the world's factory, it's an expanding military and economic power. And despite its undeniable relevance to the lives of people all around the world, the CCP feels strongly that its presence in the language we use, in the way that we define reality, imagine what's possible, what's permissible, their power needs to rise in a way that's commensurate to their economic and military might. And that's a huge ask. But China is determined to do it, and says so quite explicitly with expressions like international right to speak and the new era or development stage, or deconstruct the Western discourse system, phrases like that. China is eager to share that this is the Asian century. And in this century, the guidance of errant minds is possible, according to them. A small number of central leaders in China will define the boundary of what's imaginable. So this is not just a project for policy wonks or foreign ministries and the like. Excuse me. These days, China is moving in on so many surprising directions, or from so many surprising directions, that investors, business owners, wealth managers, and of course, environmentalists and rights activists, they're also finding an urgent need to dive into Chinese discourse. So to summarize, it's an online tool for everyone to start unpacking the motivations and intentions behind what China or CCP is saying. Our project it's to elucidate the inner meaning above all else. And it would be foolish to try to counter China's propaganda with more propaganda. That's an exercise to force people to take sides, and against China, you can't really win. So our work instead is guided by the Tibetan experience of at least 1,000 years of negotiating with China, and China, and having China as a very big and powerful neighbor that's inclined to see its peripheries as vassal states. So, okay, what is this actually? The way we've organized this tool is it's an online, like I said, open source page where you go and you see a big search bar. And you can start by entering a term in Chinese, Tibetan, and English if you have one in mind that you would like to decode, unpack. Or you can go to our alphabetical list, which is ever growing. And once you find a term, you'll see that we start with China's official translations of its own propaganda, shared on our site in English and Tibetan. And the reader has a chance to first see China's official presentation of itself in various languages. Then you can either continue to read, you can click on hyperlinks to go more in depth, or you can click on tags to see connected terms. So what you'll find when you look up a term is we try to be, wherever possible, concise, not an academic rumination on every ancient resource, every ancient resonance of an obscure term. We have consulted many scholarly sources and are much indebted to them, but we try to maintain firm focus on the accelerating importance of propaganda to new era China. So that's sort of the red thread throughout the site. And we've made every effort to be brief, but and some terms have many connotations implicitly embedded. So while this website is not a place for academic treaties, we do reference a lot of the academics who have thought deeply about these terms, and they're wherever possible hyperlinked. So you can choose to go into greater depth by sort of going down the rabbit hole and clicking on these links that we provided. But it's important to reiterate that we start with China's own official translations of their own terms. And in the future, we hope to have a categories page. We will have a categories page where you can start to really go deep into the authoritarian mind by exploring all terms that China has produced and are so relevant about environmentalism, about finance, about human rights, about religion. So you asked what makes the decoder different from similar decoder projects, and you're right that there are a lot of recent attempts to decode the CCP's language. First, what makes us different is that we are a live website, whereas most guides are one-off publications. And newspeak, ambiguous, euphemistic language used chiefly in political propaganda, well, it frequently renews, and so we need to track and update. And at a time when new jargon frequently appears, being up to date matters, especially when a sudden shift of policy and slogans can wipe billions from the value of entire industries, with global investors, for example. Something that I like about the site that makes it different is it's got humor. Tibetans are known for their strong sense of the absurd, of ridiculousness, which is nicely demonstrated when explaining CCP terms like car crash. So what that is, it's when a propaganda effort fails, it falls flat, it even backfires. Last year, the Chinese Communist Youth League launched a virtual idol, Jiangshan Zhao, and her handsome partner on Weibo, and in less than 5 hours, over 100,000 Chinese netizens left skeptical and critical messages along the lines of, wait, are we citizens or are we fans? Why are you producing these anime characters? And in the end, the couple was taken offline and dubbed the shortest lived virtual idols ever. A lot of comedy comes from people or entities being faced with situations they're not equipped for, right? And when you're seeking a new world order, that level of control, well, there's bound to be intrinsic humor. And Tibetan culture is prepared to point that out. But most importantly, in addition to being up to date and more comprehensive, the site is different because it's what Gabriel Lafitte, one of the lead researchers on the project, calls spaciousness. Meaning the website gives the user space to work out what they think for themselves. It's not a contradiction of China's word, it's an unpacking. It's looking at historical resonances, it's digging up instances when similar things have been said, and in what context. There are countless attempts to decode the CCP, many very, very good. Amnesty recently did one called What China Says. The name implying that what China does is very different than what it says. So it's a binary. So we're trying to fill that need for something that is a bit more spacious, that lets people examine historical resonances, try to make sense of the meaning behind terms without telling people what to think. It's really about giving people room to understand the history and the culture that the current central leaders come back to validate their policies, and also understand their unconscious biases, which they inherit from their ancestors. Last, I just want to say that it's not a glossary. People keep pointing out that it's something like a glossary, but actually it's not. If we have to make a comparison, something like that, let's call it a thesaurus, because it gives readers a wide range of similar concepts, and then the reader can choose which ones are actually most appropriate for the context that they have in mind. So speaking of the readers or the viewers of the site, want to make sense to you all of who is supposed to be looking at this site. It's a product from the Tibetan perspective, but it's not just for Tibetan users. I'm a user, so case in point. But funny enough, it's precisely because it's from the Tibetan perspective that it is of particular interest to international users. We have to consider the new world order that China is offering and understand its multiple facets. And China is exporting its development strategies that it formulated long ago in Tibet on the rest of the world. For lack of a better word, Tibetans have already been victims of the party state, and there's no other website from the perspective of people who have experienced the effects of these ideas and this rhetoric. The China model is being exported, so this website is an opportunity to learn from recent and distant past and make sense of all these promises, these hopeful and inspiring sounding phrases like rich pockets and big brains. Lastly, you asked me about its relevance to human rights advocates around the world. So I've already taken care to make sure that you understand that it's not just a tool for Tibetans, and it's not just a tool for human rights advocates either, but it is a tool for human rights activists. And it is for two reasons. First, because a lot of the slogans and phrases on the site directly deal with human rights. China's international discourse power can be translated from Chinese as the international right to speak, but there is an implication that when they say right to speak, it means the hearer is obliged to listen and accept party state definitions as true. And when China takes every opportunity to argue that the right to development, measured in monetary terms, is the fundamental right, and all other rights are subsidiary, it's arguing not just for special exemption from universal norms of inborn rights, but for the cancellation of all universal norms. So this is an existential issue for all people who believe in the universality of human rights. But this is also a product that was made with the process of advocacy in mind. So this is the second reason why it's important to human rights activists and advocates. Advocacy is, we're trying to empower people who are affected by China's decisions and policies, like the Tibetans have been. And the China model is being exported, as I said, for example, in Latin America. And because of that, people are being excluded from decision making, since China's infrastructure projects are being made with government-to-government consultations, with no civil society input, with no regard for environmental or gender impacts or the displacement or resettlement of people. People have no say in how their lives are being shaped by development projects, let alone the civil and political implications of government-to-government deals with authoritarians. So we're trying to promote participation of people to have a say in the decision that affects them. And we're trying to encourage Tibetan activists to teach policymakers how to more intelligently decipher Chinese rhetoric. Advocacy can seek changes by informing its organizations and decision makers to take necessary actions. And these are circumstances where duty bearers are acting or failing to act in a manner that places rights holders at a disadvantage just because they lack information. And it is in this circumstance that TCHRD seeks to help advocates educate duty bearers and change behavior ultimately in that way. Sorry, I went on a little too long, but thank you so much for letting me speak and continue to talk too much about this decoder.
Yeah, it's too much to cover. And so Ila, so thank you so much for explaining us how this open source guide to unpack China's slogans and terms all with China's official translation and its contribution in the face of new world order that China is offering, right? And also thank you so much for flagging up on what China says is different from what China does. So thank you so much. So since we are facing shortage of time, we will have to go with the final speaker of the panel. So we have our final speaker, Tsering Dojila, a senior Tibetan researcher. So Tsering Dojila has worked in Tibet as a teacher and also as a translator before escaping from Tibet in 2005. And Tsering Dojila is one of the key persons in analyzing and contextualizing China's political jargons, propaganda slogans, phrases, and this important open source guide, Decoding CCP by the Tibetan Center for Human Rights and Democracy. So Tsering Dojila, thank you very much for joining us from Australia at this time. So you are in the middle of night, maybe early morning now. And so Tsering Dojila, could you briefly tell us what makes you and your team to come out with this open source guide, important project in unpacking CCP's political jargons and slogans? And in what ways do you think bringing Tibetans' understanding and perspective in decrypting or unpacking CCP political slogans and propagandas could help the rest of the world?
Thank you very much for having me on this panel, and thank you for all the people who organized this and have give us an opportunity to share it. So you asked the question, how I come up this project. So the world after especially these world China researchers, elites, and the think tanks from Western countries, governments, and naively wished China will become as we are, a democratic and accept universal values and become democratic system. So finally, that kind of delusion is dissolved, and the world got puzzled. Even those big techs and also the big business companies who just care about their business, not care about the human rights and the real situation in China, especially for those Tibetans and Mongolian, East Turkestan, and others, even all the Chinese people, their situation, they don't care, right? But finally, they don't know what happened. This Communist Party, what about their motivation and how they could change suddenly appeared as an emperor and try to change us and create their own terms, and all the rest of the world follow them and respect it and accept it. How it is possible? Who can believe it? Now world is puzzled by the real motivation of the Chinese Communist Party. So this is a good opportunity, good time. The team behind the Decoding CCP, and so show the world those people what exactly the Communist Party, Chinese Communist Party want, and what they say, how to read their mind through not only so there are many international, they're very famous researchers, but they are wrong. Some are, of course, they are very, true, but they are not listened, ignored. But Tibetans has a long history lived with this giant power, sometimes a giant enemy, very vicious, very evil minded politicians and the emperors to try to control or try to destroy the Tibetans. But Tibetan, they are great people, and among the politician and higher ranked lamas and other, even the just common people who lived with the Chinese people, who understand the Chinese. Tibet lived with the China as a neighborhood, and daily or frequently, usually they contact with the Chinese people, Chinese culture, and Chinese politics. So now it's a right time, use the Tibetan experience, use their real experience, and read, unpack what Chinese Communist Party are doing. So that's will help at the international world and also different organizations to understand and what China really thinking, and the way we give a description, what exactly Communist Party say and what they didn't say. That those concealed things, these real motivations. So we just describe it, explain it, and present to the audience, and let the audience decide whether it's right or wrong, and give them the key how to unpack it. That's I think that's the main reason. And so sorry, what did you say? The next question? I forgot the half of it. The second question is the same, almost
Yeah,
same. Right?
same. Yeah, because you have responded. Because what makes or in what ways bringing Tibetans' experience and understanding in unpacking CCP slogans to help the rest of the world. So you
Yeah,
have, responded.
yeah. Okay. So, like one of the famous Tibetan incarnation Lama who had experience with the Chinese, Chinese Communist Party and the Kuomintang, the region before the Chinese Communist Party, and he gave a very good advice in his work. I read it and said, if you don't destroy yourself, you are not necessary to afraid of Communist Party, Chinese Communist Party. That's a really practical advice. So for the Tibetans, that means you should trust yourself. You should unite together. Even Communist Party took up Tibet, and you must trust yourself, your people. Don't betray, and try to save you. Use your intelligence and wisdom. And for the world, you can do business with China. You can do some whatever, right things you do, but use your intelligence and use your wisdom to unpack, understand what is the real motivation, what the real purpose. So, but both Tibetans, some Tibetans, and international, many people on the world, they couldn't take that sort of understand that sort of advice. So their food They don't know what to do. Yeah, so like for example, when the Mao Zedong he launched his cultural revolution for his power struggle, regain his power among the Communist Party inner circle. So other Chinese nationalists they try to destroy, eliminate Tibetan language completely from the Tibet. So they labeled it as a backwarded and only a tool serve for the superstitious religion or superstitious things. They try to eliminate Tibetan language, but those Tibetan griot people who could read the Communist Party, their mind, and then they translated they prepared and translated Mao Zedong's works in Tibetan. When the time comes, the real purpose comes, the cultural revolution is so we started, then they showed, hey, look at this. This is the Tibetan language, which translated the great words and works from Chairman Mao. How could you say Tibetan language is superstitious? It's a useless language. This is not because of the language. Its language is good. It can serve for the socialism. But some people use it the wrong way. So, yeah, for example, then Tibetan language, nobody can point at Tibetan language, say that this is a bad language, because it is armor. Yeah, it's a roar, the armor of Mao Zedong's words. Yeah. So that sort of experience, practical experience can be used now and serve the world. Yeah.
Dojila, thank you so much. And because of your experience of having lived in Tibet and having worked in Tibet and live under the Chinese Communist Party, you have lots of interesting things and issues that you can contribute to the world and also for this decoding CCP. But because we are running out of time, I really wanted to get back to you with questions, but I'm afraid if we could go on this. But since at the end of your presentation, you have raised about language. So this is really concerning thing, right? China's recent ever increasing push to remove all Tibetan medium schools and also all those informal Tibetan language classes conducted by Tibetan monasteries. So very disturbing and concerning things. So I just wanted to get back to Sophie. And after that, Lixila, if you could also add your comment on this about the recent report by Tibet Action Institute on these very important issues of human rights violations that are taking place, in particular in focus of Tibetan language. The report says that at least Chinese authorities are forcing 3 out of every 4 Tibetan students, right, are taken away from their family and then undergo these colonial boarding schools, separating children from parents. So Sophie, so what is your take and what is your observation? And from human rights point of view, what kinds of violation is involved in this?
First of all, unsurprisingly, I've just learned a huge amount from my fellow panelists. The concerns about language education range all the way from the fact that communities are, under international law, entitled to have a say in education, and especially for distinct communities that have language or religion or other traditions that they want to uphold. They have a right for an education to be delivered through that particular medium. And even if you don't want to think about language as a right or something that authorities need to wrestle with people about, it is very clear from the experts on who work for the Convention on the Rights of the Child and on the Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights and on discrimination, that the best practice for educating children, broadly speaking, is to do so first in their mother tongue and then later on in another language. It's also clearly linked to social emotional welfare. And one of the people who joined Tibet Action's panel the other night spoke very movingly about how having gone to one of these kinds of residential schools profoundly changed him as a person, his personality, his emotions, his ability to interact with people. And so it's not just about who gets to decide what's taught and in which language. It's literally about the well-being of children.
Thank you, Sophie. Lexila, would you like to add some comment on this?
Candela, this is not just one case, but China has adopted this monolithic approach of introducing the national language in all over China, right? So that concerns also with Tibet. So, in fact, if you look at Wang Yang's visit during the 70 years celebration of so-called peaceful liberation, he emphasized, he stressed on these issues, right? Use of national language, national identity. So, in all, what we felt is there is an instability mood in the minds of the Chinese leaders. They felt that this language, the Tibetan language, could be an irritant for making China distracted or some kind of unstable. So, but it has its own values. If Chinese leaders have a wisdom, right, the Nalanda tradition, the Buddhist traditions are preserved in this language, which is a soft power for China, if in case China has a wisdom to talk about, right? So in a way, what we felt is, because China is not just about, right, eradicating the language, the whole system, the mechanism is to annihilate the Tibetan identity, right, and make Tibet just like any other Chinese cities, Chinese towns, right? So therefore, is a big, I think, Chinese approach, a systemic approach. It's not just about it happens just a year or two. It was there since long time back, because China has this kind of fear factor in their mind. So therefore, I think the best way is to Chinese leaders to have more wisdom to understand the need of the language, and not just the language, right? Because China, if you look at China, see, over the recent past, under the Xi Jinping's leadership, they just want to introduce everything into Chinese characteristics. That's the big issue. Even His Holiness recently talked about, right? China in lacking in understanding the diversity. Right. So therefore, I think they should have more wisdom and to understand the diversity and the universality of the freedom of all the humanities, right? So this is what we felt, and China need to keep up the pace in understanding the values. If China really need to make, because just recently they published the white paper on democracy, right? And if China really want to introduce or impress on the people-centric, value-based system, it's not about power, it's not about money, it's not about military, but they need to be more concerned about the justice, equality, right, and also about the freedom of the people. Otherwise, they cannot sustain.
Thank you, Lexila. And I wish we have a little longer time to talk on this and lots of things to talk. But since we are running out of time, we ran out of time already by 7 minutes. So, yeah. So thank you so much, because all our extreme panelists have lots of interesting things to put on the panel. And it's really difficult to hear all these details and insights within these 60 minutes in 1 hour. So it's really very short, but since it's for 1 hour, we have put. And so we couldn't take live questions now because of time. And so we will move to hear our final concluding remark from the panelists. Lexila, over to you.
I thought that I'm not going to get a time. So good that I'm going to get a time for making a punchline, right? So 70 years, what China has done in Tibet. Political repression, cultural assimilation, economic marginalizations, environmental destructions. This is all China has done in Tibet for the past 70 years. And this has disempowered the Tibetan people. So for the future, in order to resolve the long-standing Sino-Tibetan conflict, history is not the area of contention. We already know that Tibet was independent in the past. We have to move forward, look into the future, and what should be good for the Tibetans and for the Chinese people. So therefore, we remain committed, but we are resolute in our approach to put forward in resolving the Sino-Tibetan conflict through middle way policy. So I believe that Chinese leaders have visions. Chinese leaders have have an understanding about what the future should be for the betterment of not just the Tibetan people, but for the Chinese. So this is my punchline. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lexila and Sophie. Your concluding remarks.
There's so much to say, it's hard to wrap up, but I think we have to, and by we, I mean Human Rights Watch has to both sound the alarm, particularly about cases like the Tangdra monks and what the prosecution and the sentences given to them mean, but also do our best to support responses to an issue that I think we have all spoken about today and that's of such concern, which is about language preservation as both pivotal to identity, but as Isla has explained in this terrific TCHRD project shows how language can be manipulated, and that we need to understand what certain terms mean and what connotations they carry, but also to do our best to make sure that the prospect of a fully Tibetan language education remains alive, at least to people outside the country.
Thank you so much, Sophie. Yeah. Ila, yeah, your final concluding remark?
Yes, thank you. So, in light of the auspicious anniversary, now I like the invitation that was extended to be optimistic. And if we can draw attention to these concerns through this tool that TCHRD has produced, then I would be extremely satisfied. I hope that we can turn these concerns into meaningful relief, as pointed out. So thank you for giving us the time to talk about this tool and to try to make sense of these distorted histories in order to look towards a better future.
Sure, certainly, yeah. Thank you so much, Ila. And Chirindojila?
So the decoding CCP can be
all our panelists for all your insightful presentation and contribution for making this panel very informative. And we believe this kind of panel is one of many ways that we can speak for people who are silenced by the Chinese Communist Party. So thank you very much, all our extreme panelists, for your insights on this panel. And thank you all our virtual audience for being with us and for hearing us in this panel. And of course, the panel will not be complete without thanking our technical team, Tibet TV team, for making this broadcast live possible. And thank you so much, everyone. With this, we come to the end of the panel on the eve of the International Human Rights Day to remember people inside Tibet. Thank you so much.